I hate my work. I have to work because I have no other choice. And that the suggestion that everyone should be happy at work is perhaps a bar a little too high. There are two ways to think about the work you do.
But if you hate your job for more than 6 months, do something about that. Yeah? Work is part of life, period. And when people start talking work-life balance, get a life. Yeah.
I think there are also a lot of very good fully remote organizations that don't have an office. Benefit for that is that you welcome David and Helmut to the show. How did you guys meet? How did the book come around? And then really want to dive into this mid-career crisis, burnout, how you can diagnose it, what you can do, some practical advice for folks in that part of their career would be really useful. But David, why don't you start, introduce yourself, how you guys met?
Yes, thanks, Lewis. I'm David Oxley. I'm one half of the Doctors Schuster and Oxley writing collaboration. I like to think I bring the fish and chips and the custard creams to Helmut's Viennese whirls and schnitzel. I think the background for us is that we were both Helmut's a trained economist. I did a lot of with the social science behind organizational change, and within that context, how people behave, how they react to different changes, different challenges at work. And then we came to work together, Helmut and I, at BP for about 20 odd years. And we did a number of projects around the company. So we had always said it would be fascinating to write a book about how in situations people struggle making kind of rational choices. The emotion overtakes some of the rationality when it gets into both personal career choices, but also to some extent organizational change. And it's something that I think a lot of academic books don't really get into. They talk about, well, this is the way it should be, this is the logic, and they're very dry and kind of hard to navigate. So we thought, wouldn't it be fun to write some fun books, engaging books, interesting books, something that might appeal to a new audience, something that entertained as well as inspired.
No, I love that. When you say emotion into job decisions, what do you mean exactly?
Well, I think without getting into the deep sort of social science research behind it, the idea that we see what we want to see, we believe what we want to believe, we superimpose to some extent a conclusion that we've already reached. I hate my work. I have to work because I have no other choice. And that really sort of invades all of the other decisions that follow. So how you frame the circumstances that you find yourself in has a profound effect over how you then sort through the data that is coming your way. It's very easy to dismiss the data that doesn't confirm your view and latch on to the stuff that does.
Yeah, no, it's true. Classic, like narrative in your head, right? But yeah, no, some people, it depends. I mean, some people, have to work to make money. You do also hear a lot of, and I think this weighs on people. It's like, you've got to find a job that makes you happy, or you've got to be happy in your job. And I think maybe it's kind of, if you're lucky enough to find something that you enjoy, because some people, they're not. Or do you think otherwise?
Well, there are nuances, aren't there? I think happy is a kind of loaded phrase because it sort of suggests we did some interviews for the book launch around Blue Monday and why it was the saddest day of the year, supposedly. Right. And in a way, the suggestion that everyone should be happy at work, I do agree, is perhaps a bar a little too high. But how you believe, why you believe you work, and the circumstances that you frame in your head around why you choose to do that specific job over several others, it has a lot to do with your state of mind. I mean, put it bluntly, I'm twisting a story if I put it this way. There are two ways to think about the work you do. It's a necessary evil. I have to do it with horrible people. The work is unfulfilling, and I'm surrounded by signs of evil wherever I go at my office, is one side of the coin. The other side is I choose to do what I do. There are some good people that I get to work with, and I'm actually surrounded by some signs of joy. And to some extent, we get to choose which of those two animals we feed, and whichever one we feed is the one that tends to be the predominant point of view.
Couldn't agree more. 1000%. It's just the story you tell yourself in your head, right? Because you listen to yourself the most, and you meet so many people that negative, for want of a better word, or the self-limiting beliefs, or whatever the right word to call it, constantly repeating it to themselves, and they're going in, it's like, oh my god, it's Monday, and oh, I hate this person, I don't like this person, and it just suddenly gets all self-fulfilling. It weighs heavy. You come across different. Probably get passed over for the promotion. They don't want you on the team. You're not getting invited to that project, or
I think many people stay in an environment which is toxic, simply toxic. And I think they have, or many of them have, basically family, children, need to basically earn money, and many people just simply don't have the courage to basically do something else. And I think that's one thing which is very important to understand. Once you are what I call corporate slavery, and you have this treadmill to provide for your family, it's very, very difficult to get out of that, because it's not only your choice, it's a choice with your family, with your kids, with your wife. And so I think many people, and I also told people, just, figure it out 6-8 months. But if you hate your job for more than 6 months, do something about that. I also advise people, just have interviews with headhunters, people like you. Every 2 years, check your market value. And you might say, wow, I'm very happy to work in the company I work for. Or you might say, wow, there's like the grass is greener on the other side. And that's the choices we have to make. And that's what we want to educate people about: choices, red lines.
No, you're right. I want to pick a couple of things there, actually. I mean, you're right. A lot of people, you get stuck. You get stuck in a job that's well paid. You've built up, you have a family, you've got your mortgage, and all of those things that just mean that, like, you can't afford not to do what you're doing. Maybe you'd love to go and be a writer, but it just doesn't pay. So there is a lot of that. Who wouldn't? I mean, I was, so you get caught into that. And again, sometimes, again, to your point, David, maybe it's how you think of it. If you really, because again, it might just be, it's actually providing and enabling me to have, and my family to have, the life that we would like to have, or it's providing us with the means to experience stuff, and life's about experiences and so forth. There's one way to look at it like that. The other is more of a, oh my God, I don't want to be going into work and stuff. The other thing I just wanted to know, and Helmut, you mentioned toxic work environment, and it's talked about a lot, and I just wanted to get your kind of thoughts on it. What is a toxic work environment? Like, is it something like is subjective? Is it something that's, you could say, like, this company has a toxic work environment, or is it a point of a perspective that one might have on the people and so forth that they're working
with?
Well,
it's obviously a spectrum, and some people have a higher threshold for pain and others less. I think that's very important to understand. Some people just like very happy in like very, very high intensity investment banking. Others just don't like that. And I think you need to really understand where you are, what you want out of a job. So I do believe toxic for me is a very, very individual perception. What is toxic for one person might be acceptable for another person. But I think there's probably 80% overlap. And I've worked in an environment where we would have said it's toxic. And I normally have a very high threshold for pain. And I've worked in other work environments where I said, well, actually, that's a breeze. That's really nice. And a lot depends on the boss. So I think it's very difficult to say this company is a toxic work environment, because I really, truly believe your boss makes a huge difference. And a great boss can really, really just change everything for you. And a bad boss is really the worst thing that can ever happen to you. Unfortunately, there are probably more good bosses, I think. But there are probably 10 to 20% of bosses which are really toxic. And my advice is just stay away from them. David?
Can I just add one thing? I think when we get into this conversation about toxicity, there are sort of three variables. And I think it's important that we separate the variables. One variable is the company that you're working for, its culture, the leaders. That is definitely a very profound impact on toxicity. The other is what you perceive your alternatives to be. If you feel that there aren't alternatives, then you get stuck in this mindset that I'm a prisoner of this environment. If you have alternatives, then you are much less trapped in this sort of prison cell of toxicity. And then the third is your own perspective, your own point of view. Why am I doing this? What is it for? Is it worth it? Right. So to Helmut's point, many of us can suffer pain. Actually, if you think about crisis management, many of us have, over the space of our careers, been either parachuted in or had to preside over managing something that was very unpleasant, a downsizing of a company, an acquisition being acquired, or the company's had some sort of industrial accident or something. It's not pleasant, and I don't know whether it necessarily ticks all the boxes that I've just defined as toxicity, but it is unpleasant. But you're able to manage through it for 6 months because there's this deep sense that you're trying to make things better. So I think how you frame it in this sense of how you're coming to the scenario is important. So I think I just wanted to add that, because I think sometimes, and this is the purpose of our writing collaboration, we're trying to help people frame things in as constructive a way as possible. And so when it becomes binary, I'm stuck in an unfulfilling job and I hate it, and I don't know how to get out, then I think that's part of the problem. We've reduced the challenge to something that's sort of either one or two dimensional. When we start to have people in our lives, coaches, mentors, confidants, family, friends, that can try and shake us out of that and say, actually, look, no, there are more pieces to this jigsaw than perhaps we're giving it credit for.
Yeah. Interesting. And so a couple of things. So I guess what can people do about it is the big question. Just a few things. The other kind of comment I have, and this for me runs through everything, and you see it in all conversations. I see a lot of people, they talk about work-life balance, which I think is a dreadful equation, because the opposite of life is death, and people equate work to death. And already off the bat, it's like you're going into the worst. So I wanted to get your thoughts on work-life balance as a phrase in itself.
Oh,
and secondly, go on, Helmut. Go on. Let's start with that.
No, I just hate it. Yeah, work is part of life. Period. And when people start talking work-life balance, get a life. Yeah, I mean, I really do believe work is part of life. And I think that's one thing, and I heard it first time, I think allegedly Einstein said it, who said basically work is the only thing that gives meaning to life. And, when you're 16, 17 and you come across and figure, how stupid is that? As you go through your career, you figure, actually, this is not stupid at all. This is so true at the end of the day. Yeah. Work is a part of life, however you define work. Yeah. So I don't agree with the balance, work-life balance. I think it's most overused, and I think it's not very a useful frame. I think that's for me. But I just want to go back to one point. I mean, building on what David said, I think what we try to do is actually make people sure that they make conscious choices. Because most people drift into something. Yeah. I mean, there's so many situations where people figure, why am I where I am? How did I end up in that place? Yeah. And I think it's what we try to educate people. Life is about choices. Yeah. You just need to make sure that you make conscious choices. Most people don't make that. Yeah. It's just scary how very few people really think deeply about life, career, relationships. And that's what we try to help people with, to create a frame, a structure, the way to think about careers, money, quality of life, all these things. And I think I had so many feedback about the book, people saying, wow. And it came basically both to David and myself, like as a surprise. How can people, such simple concepts, not anyhow know them, understand them? Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, it's almost like I talk about this a little bit, but being the CEO of your life, CEO of your career,
Yes.
taking ownership. in charge, having a little personal board of directors, people around you that can advise and stuff. Because I think it's a really good way to think about it. Because you're right, so many people you meet are they're stumbling through. They're earning money, they've got expenses, they're just caught in a rut or whatever you want to call it. And
okay, Louis, can I say one thing? Be a good CEO of your life, because there are many CEOs who basically don't run their company very well. So
you're right.
Good CEO, yeah.
Shouldn't be managed quarter by quarter. No, I agree.
Yes.
I think if I bring those two things together, Louis, the notion of work life and the notion of being the CEO of your career, I think the difficulty with both of these concepts is that there's a compartmentalization of what work is relative to what life is, and I think this is what we tend to react to, which is that there are studies, and we did a study for one of our books about people in their 70s and 80s that continue to be vibrant and having fulfilling lives. And what's at the center of that vibrancy is some form of work. We came across a shopkeeper in their 70s who sold sweets in a sweet store in Scotland, who was 75, no plans to retire, loved every day, and they were selling sweets. I mean, it wasn't the most, sort of complicated existence. There was someone else who was the receptionist of at a hairdresser's in her 80s, who loved every day and was saying, I like the camaraderie of working with the other people in the hairdressers. And what lessons can you extract from this? Which is that it's artificial to some extent to say that work is somehow separate to life. And in a way, it's counterproductive, because we then start to compartmentalize work. And this is where I think we drift into putting work on autopilot and getting into things like the concepts of boreout and quiet quitting, where there's a piece of our life that we sort of put mute on it and say, okay, we're just going to sort of run this on autopilot because, our interests are somehow somewhere else. But in separating them out, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. We start to reduce it to a contractual obligation. I will be available between 9 and 5, which is what the job requires. And you see all these battles being played out with the work from home stuff at the moment, and the forced return to the office, where there's the sort of authority saying you will return to the office because I hold the contractual strings. And if you're reducing your work to contracts, then what excuse do you have, really, other than to comply with them? But if it's a conversation that's different to that, about we're trying to achieve something extraordinary, and it doesn't really matter where we are in the world to do it, then you sort of somehow are released from this prison. So I just wanted to make that comment, that there are dangers of compartmentalizing these things, which is why we tend to say work life sort of reduces work to a contractual, how can I get the time off I need to do things that are more important for me, or release myself from the stress of work, when in reality, I think it's better, based on our experience and research, to try and find work that fuels your energy rather than depletes it.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, it's a very good thing to have responsibility, to want to contribute to society, to take things on, like it's, as humans, like I think that's where we grow, that's where we feel part of something. You want that. People talk about not wanting that, too much stress, but I think for humans, it's so important. And it's also often the work, just the fact of doing something that is productive or creative or something, and the process of doing these things, and then being responsible for people and having responsibility for others and servicing them and serving them, and all of these things where I think we should be embracing, not shying away from. And it's a good thing, and I want to be encouraging my kids to be doing that as they start to get older.
That's a brilliant point, Lewis. 9 out of 10 of the cases we come across where people feel trapped is that they have found themselves in this sort of circular hamster wheel where there are bills to be paid and their goals at work are to survive the next day, the next week, the next month, to get to the next promotion, the next pay rise. And it's at that, I would argue, very almost primordial level of subsistence and existence. And we would contrast that. One of the things we say in a groundhog career is that it's startling that 60% of us, according to Gallup, feel unfulfilled by our work, but an almost staggeringly unbelievable number of 20% say work is a source of misery in their lives. And you sort of go, well, there's something kind of that's a powerful set of statistics. So CIPD found last year that 90% of people don't particularly care about their work; they're not engaged. So this comes back to this notion of boreout and quiet quitting.
Yes.
And if we contrast that with the other side of the equation, there's a little bit of a formula for what's the difference. What's the difference between the 40% that seem to get something from their work and the 60% that don't, or the 10% in CIPD's case? And interestingly, it's not the company. It's not the. So it's too easy to some extent to go, well, you know, they get to work for companies that have table tennis tables and ping pong and, you know, and bean bags and, you know, work from home. Actually, it's not. It's how the people are framing the work themselves and having some greater purpose in their lives that work is facilitating. So that for us was a very powerful thing.
No, definitely. And there's also this narrative of, you know, people like to shoot up, you know, like as in it's the company's fault, or the company should be providing me with X, Y, Z, and the company, it's always someone else's fault. But actually, you have the chance to have agency for yourself, to create something meaningful for yourself. And I think once you get that, suddenly it's so empowering that you can, it's on you. You can do something about it. You don't have to wait for anyone.
I mean, for me, the key thing is I truly believe, and I think we do believe, most people are naturally motivated. I really believe most people go to work, they're motivated, they want to achieve something, they want to get things done. But what happens then? We throw people into endless meetings, endless process, and make it life so much harder to get things done. Yeah. Because I think at the end of the day, you're very happy, everyone, all of us. If we get things done and see results, we're happy. We love it, yeah? If it's just an Excel spreadsheet or whatever, but if you basically have endless loops of iteration bosses, it creates misery. And I think that's what companies need to think a lot about. How can they simplify people's life at work, yeah? Most companies, and BP was a prime example, we had so many policies and processes, and David keeps smiling, yeah? It was just a nightmare, yeah? I mean, it was just a nightmare. Everything was in process. Nobody really understood the process. Nobody didn't even know where to find the process. It was amazing. And this is probably typical of every large company. And I've worked in 3, and David has worked in more. I've worked in 4. So I think this is corporate reality for many people. Motivated people being demotivated by endless layers of process.
Yeah. And amount of people I speak to through the work I do, you have thousands of conversations. So many people, it's interesting, don't want to work in large corporate firms anymore. You're seeing a lot that want to work in smaller, mid-sized firms where, you know, maybe they have more autonomy. It's just, you know, it's a different type of environment. And I think that's, it's very interesting. More and more people are wanting to do that. David, I want to get your thoughts. Just going back to you mentioned remote work from home. Are you with Jamie Dimon and Elon Musk on 5 days a week, or are you on a bit more of a...
Watch your mouth out, associating me with
oh, hello, Donald. David, D is for Donald. I didn't realize that. E, Donald Oxley, love it. Very
Lewis Miller. No, I don't tend to take the view that is espoused by certain famous people that should know better. I think, you know,
and maybe a follow up to it, just as in a context of, again, people's thoughts around enjoying work and feeling part of community, and and so forth? Because I think there is a seriousness to that.
Yeah, I think that it's a fascinating conversation because it starts to, in a way, it's a mirror that we can hold up to where we are in the current employment context to say what's really going on here. There was a series of interviews that the London BBC News did about a year ago, where the work from home thing was really gathering pace, and a bunch of companies were saying you've got to be back in the office at least 3 days a week. And 9 out of 10 of the people that the BBC News were interviewing were saying, well, I won't accept that. It doesn't work for my lifestyle. And I was fascinated by this explanation. And I was going, well, we all have to make compromises to work. When you go to an interview, you have a dialogue, and they issue you a contract, and the contract says, here are the terms and conditions, will you accept them? And you sign up, and in the process, you eyes wide open say, okay, in exchange for doing X, I get Y. But we've lost that somehow. That seems to have now. Why have we lost it is interesting. Part of it, this notion of entitlement seems to be unhealthy. It seems to be suggesting that work somehow has an obligation somehow to facilitate lifestyles of people. That seems to be pushing the needle or the pendulum too far away from what is ultimately what the Friedman spectrum of Friedman doctrine of satisfy the shareholders. There is nothing else. That is the only thing that we have to do if you're in business. At the other end of the spectrum, I think companies using an authoritarian approach without explaining why it makes sense doesn't make sense either. So you get this Jamie Dimon approach, which is, over my dead body, everyone needs to be in the office. And you kind of go, but why? Right? Or what's the purpose? Now, I think we look at it from both ends of the spectrum because we're trying to give advice to individuals. Predominantly our writing is to engage as sort of virtual coaches to professionals who are trying to navigate this. So we tend to take their perspective on a lot of it and say, so just think carefully about what it is you want to do with your career. There are very good reasons. There's this thing called proximity bias, which is very real, that if you are physically close to the decision makers at work, you are likely to get more career opportunities than those that are distant. And I think you need to weigh that up with the notion of, if you want to take, in some cases, a Friday afternoon and go and do something at 3 o'clock, which is not really work related, but it gives you the, cloak of invisibility to do so while you're working remotely. You have to weigh that up with, the consequences to your career. From a company standpoint, though, I do think that we're missing something in some of this dialogue when people stamp their feet and say, just do what I tell you. There are two things about that I worry most about from the company's standpoint. The first is, are we really saying that all of the years that we've spent trying to encourage people to unleash their discretionary effort and creativity and make decisions autonomously on behalf of the company, are we really saying that we want them to forget that now and just follow the specific tasks that we give them? I send you an email, you must respond. I make a phone call to you, you must pick up. That reduces them to sort of machines, really, to assets. On the flip side of the spectrum, are we not, don't we want to be engaged in something greater? Don't we want to be engaged in, rather than physically being in the office 9 till 5, don't we want to say, actually, I want to achieve this goal? So in a recruitment context, I want to get so many more clients, I want to place so many more jobs. And do I really care physically where the individual is that's doing that? I think that's for me what gets lost in this dialogue, that there are,
I think
Helmut mentioned a spectrum. There is a spectrum of what makes sense for work from home and what doesn't.
What David says is actually very important, because I've been thinking about that a lot. I do not believe in working from home full time. I absolutely do believe in flexible working, giving people the space they need to be at their best. But what I think companies haven't really done yet is really figured out, what is this person's job and what does success look like? I've not seen a single company, I've seen many, that has a very, very good performance management system that can say, if you do that, you've done a great job and you do it from wherever you want. We find it in sales, which is easy, because you have your sales performance, but in most other parts of corporate jobs, we don't have that. And I think companies need to be smarter about that.
Yeah. What's your, you mentioned full time. You're kind of against full time from home. Why are you against full time from home?
Me?
What is it? Yeah. Like, could some jobs be done at home full time, do you think, or you think it's better to be?
Basically, I do think you need to have a sense of community. Secondly, I don't know how people work, yeah, but I do believe, and I see it in myself, yeah. If I work in a professional context, I have dialogue. I test ideas immediately. I go to the person next door. I say, "Can you have a check? Can you look at that? Does it make sense?" Yeah. I do believe, and this is my firm belief, that's our belief, is 2 brains are always smarter than 1 brain. 3 are smarter than 2, and so on, yeah? So if you are in a context of an office where you have many people, smart people, professional people, it's a completely different thinking that you start creating than being at home with 2 little children that basically don't understand that when daddy is home, he does work. So basically that constant interruptions going on, yeah? That's why I'm against full-time working from home.
Can I, David? I just want to add to that, though. It's complicated when we think about the gig economy and we think about how employment in its traditional form is evolving. One of the things that we've observed is that in 1980, there were 500,000 people who had dial-up internet. Today, there are 5 billion people, and that's B with a B, billion, that have broadband internet access. So the question to look at the other end of the spectrum. So Helmut's views, I think, are very accurate for where the corporate workplace is today. But this explosion in the gig economy, this notion of virtual companies, the idea of not traditional employment, but sort of these virtual collaborations, particularly in the startup world, I think there's legs there. There's definitely something that's a trend that will grow over the space in the next 20 or 30 years, despite the protectionist politics that seem to be going on at the moment. It feels like if there are educated people in India and China and South America that have broadband access, that want to do work, who would enthusiastically embrace doing routine work, why that wouldn't grow quite significantly over the space of the next 20 or 30 years. So there is a difference between, I think, a London-centric view or a westernized centric view of how work should take place, and someone coming out of a top US university or a UK university and looking for employment, and some of the things about, well, look, working in the office is probably something you should seriously consider. It's better for your career, and companies have to some extent a right to ask for that. But then in parallel to that, there's this extraordinarily talented billion population in India that have broadband access that could do work just as well through a broadband connection. And you have, I think if you're betting on this, you have to say over the next 20 years, there's going to be more and more of that. And then that reopens this conversation of remote working in a different context.
Yeah, but
so
actually,
I don't know that we're...
Yeah, I think, David, this is really important, yeah, because if people want to work from home in America, in Europe, in Britain, if they can work from home, I might as well as an employer outsource it to India, China, or wherever, yeah. So I think people need to understand that, yeah. Why would I pay somebody a London salary if I don't see him in the office anyhow? And so I think this, but the other thing, and that's a quick story for me, I find it just absurd that people pay tons of money going to university, having a certain attendance requirement, yeah, just being failed by the professor, like saying, flunked, do it again, then starting a paid work and suddenly say, I need my lifestyle, I need that, something no university would ever tolerate or accept. I find that actually really absurd.
You can argue that universities don't prepare people for the world of the world.
I would argue that. Yeah.
But I would argue that, and also just drawing on what you guys have said and maybe just broadening it out a little bit, given what I do, I see quite a wide variety of firms of all different shapes and sizes. And I think there are also a lot of very good fully remote organizations that don't have an office. And the benefit for that is that you can source the best talent wherever they are on the planet. Measuring success is about output, not time.
Yeah.
So you can pay them whatever you pay them. All you're concerned about is what the output is, depending on what job they do. And I think David, to your point, and I think it links nicely with you, Helmut, as well. It's I think over the next 15, 20 years, and I think we're seeing it now as well, is that there's many really good companies that are fully remote and have put the right processes in place, not loads and loads of meetings, but just the right process in place to build a very productive company. And then communicate it effectively, because I think a big thing about hiring is making sure that people are completely aware of what they're walking into, and different environments suit different people. And so it might be that, for me, I love going to the office 5 days a week. I want to be sitting next to you guys, and that's my thing. And I'm going to go find a job. I'm going to decide to go find a job like that, and that's going to make me really happy and do my best work. Whereas actually, maybe it's the other side. Maybe I'm a wonderful crypto guy, and these companies are fully remote, and I'm really happy doing it on the beach in Barbados, and I'm living my best life. It's all good. I think it's all good. I think it's important for the firms to create the right structures for themselves, and if they're clear on what works for them, great. And then you go find people that fit your environment, fit your culture.
I think that's a lovely bridge, Lewis, a little bit, because the diversity of work, of what we used to define to some extent as blue collar and white collar work. I mean, we go back 30 years, it was an office job, or it was working, in a factory, or whatever the equivalent is, or a trained mechanic or laborer. But the point I guess I'm trying to make is that the spectrum of work opportunities now are so broad, and this is one of the things that we try and navigate when we talk about individual career choices. Going back to the midlife crisis or mid-career crisis, or this inability for some of us who've been in the workplace for 20, 30, 40 years to think about the spectrum of work as it now exists, because it is exploding. The opportunities now, whether it be to work for NGOs, fully remote working, startups, there are opportunities to sign up to these gig platforms where you do small contracts. There are so many alternatives now to the traditional work environment, but the traditional work environment still is the sort of predominant discussion. Most of the discussion that people have, and most of the field of vision, is to some extent still about these very traditional 50, 100-year-old type employment propositions. And I think that's changing. And I think, to your point, I would absolutely agree, over the next 20 or 30 years, let's call them non-traditional work propositions, are going to be a huge story, and are going to start to chip away at the establishment.
Absolutely. And also, if you're running a company and you want to hire the best available people, that person might not be a person that wants to do 5 days a week in an office. They might not even live in your country. But, you might have a great business plan, you've got the money and stuff. But as we know, people, well, until AI are replacing some of these things, but let's just assume it's a human for the job that you need. You just want to hire the best person for it. And that could be anywhere on the planet. When we layer on top AI agents and all of these different things, I think it's going to be interesting to see how that evolves.
Louis,
so can we, I would love just to...
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, no, please, Helmut, please go for it.
Yes, you made a very good point about it. I do believe existing corporations are going to find it very, very hard to basically become like virtual companies. I do believe if you set up a company, a new startup, and you have the right process, it's much easier to create working from home, remote working, rather than transitioning a big company like BP or Unilever or Procter & Gamble into like a kind of remote working context.
Yeah, absolutely. And then just to broaden it out, but just focus on the individual, and just also maybe this midlife, mid-career crisis, just to end with that. Because what I've seen, and I'm 43, and I think I might be in my mid-career. maybe not quite yet. I think it's the 100-Year Working Life. I forget who wrote that book, but many people after 20 years, I think are going through that, and layering all this stuff we're talking about work patterns changing, non-traditional work. Like what just some advice to someone that is going through that now, like they can feel it, they're not quite sure how to describe it or what it is, but it's just they need a change. Or how would you go about doing it?
I think if I start, this is very much what our latest book, The Groundhog Career, is all about. There are multiple things. We'll try and sort of boil it down. The problem that we tend to find in our careers after 10 or 15 years is that naive enthusiasm that fueled us in the first 10 or 15 years, that notion that we were joining a workforce that had already mastered everything. I don't know if you can cast your mind back to the first 5 years at work, but you were the sort of new kid on the block. Everyone knew what they were doing. They all seemed to do it effortlessly. And there you are turning up going, oh, I don't know how to do any of this. So you really strive in the first 5 or 10 years to try and learn something, to get a leg up, to try and make you feel less inadequate, to master something, to feel like you can sort of rub shoulders with the other people in the workplace that have been there for many years. And this sort of sense of insecurity, or the desire to prove yourself, or the idea that you want to run as fast as the other people, tends to get you through the first 5 or 10 years. It tends to get you, and it could be just simply the mercenary aspects of work, which is that I want to earn a certain amount of money. I want to, get to a certain level. But whatever that fuel is that burns, it starts to burn away, and you're left with a little bit of an empty tank when you enter sort of your mid to late 30s. And so the question at that stage is, once you've mastered the job, once you've proven you can do it, once you've recognized or been recognized that actually, you can compete reasonably well with everyone else, well, what do you do next? What's the second act? And that's somehow what people struggle with. There needs to be something deeper that fuels you in the second phase. So think about this in the context of, a rocket ship going to Mars or something. What's the second phase? How do we fuel that second inflection in your career? And very often it's the search for deeper meaning. In fact, to some extent, if there's one answer to this question, it's the search to understand why we do what we do. So if we think about this in the context of Maslow's pyramid, or if we think about this in the context of asking ourselves to deepen the reason that we do what we do, it can't simply be in the research we do. There's sort of talic or extrinsic motivations. I want a bonus. I want to make a certain amount of money. I want to be able to afford to live in a nice house. I want to put my kids in private school. There are these motivations that last for a period of time. And then once you've proven you can do them, what's next? What is it that drives me to that next phase? We think that the answer to the question is, many people seem to come into life and go, I was born to be X, whatever it might be, an entrepreneur. Or, actually, that's a relatively small number of people. Most of us at some stage just have to get a job and pay bills. We have to, sort of, what do my kids talk about? Now it's an adulting challenge. I have to adult now. And so this challenge to then go, but what's beyond the initial phase is what we deal with in a groundhog career. And it's got something to do with switching from talic or short-term or superficial measures to something that is more of a collective measure. I am doing this because I have a sense of adventure. I want to know how far I can go. It's an exploration, but it's open-ended in that sense. It doesn't have a time frame on it. Or I'm doing this because I have a sense of duty, or it's for love of my family. I do this for love of my family. I'm a provider. Or I'm trying to solve a consequential problem, a problem that by solving, I create great benefit for a broader spectrum of humanity. So if you will, in a way, it becomes less selfish in some ways and more selfless in the sense of trying to say, hey, I'm trying to create something that's a bit broader. I need to understand that what my role is in the universe beyond simply making a salary.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love that. It's true. I mean, going back to this university thing, and if you went to university, but so much of life is, you know, you do well at your, you know, in the UK, GCSEs, you do your A levels. Yeah, so much of life is, you know, you do well at your GCSEs, you get A levels, you get to university, You then start to get into like the corporate world, and so much of it's, if it's a big corporate, it's very hierarchical, right? It's like, I need to make manager. I make more money. You get the goals and stuff from your manager, and it's like, right, hit this, and you get this bonus. It's financial, and you know, you're constantly going up and up and up. When you get to your mid-career, which, like, let's say you're in your 40s, early 40s, 40, probably even starts at, you know, late 30s, and you suddenly you wander into a leadership role. And then it's, you know, to your point, David, you know, like the incremental changes in money doesn't affect your life a huge amount. You know, if you're lucky enough, you know, I know a lot of people aren't, but if you're lucky enough to be, you know, to be at the kind of top of the pyramid almost, earning good money, doesn't change. And you start to lose, I don't know, say lose your way, or you just, your success has been so rooted in like financial kind of stuff that you do see. I see people, all those people fall off a cliff almost. It's like, well, I've got the house, I've got the car, I've got the holiday, I can go skiing anytime I want.
I so agree with that. And I think the key answer to that, we all have that. I mean, we might have 30s, 40s. Yeah, we all have that. Once we have reached a certain level, we aspire to most of our life, and we've reached it. It's like, wow. It's like the Olympian. Yeah. Once he's won the Olympics or made the Olympics, then there's this period of like, wow, what's next? And I think this is the key thing. And our book basically talks about that. That might be the time to do a career change. That might be the time to reinvent yourself into something on the side. I mean, I know so many people in the 40s just simply started a little business on the side or did something. I see that in many people new from BP, they're now in the late 30s. Well, I would like to do a little startup on the side, or do a bit of investing, or doing that. Yeah. And I can only encourage, yeah, you always need to have dreams. Yeah? If you've reached your dreams at one point in time, replace them with other dreams. Yeah. And that's for me the secret to happiness. Always keep dreaming and never stop dreaming.
Love that. So true. I wonder if that's why a lot of people get into like ultra running and marathons and long cycles when you get to the late 30s, 40s, me included. But it's good to just it's good. But you know, to your point, I mean, it's, you know, I mean, I'm, you know, I've run my own business for 15 years, and I'm a bit of a, I love doing difficult things, and but you know, to the point of just doing running and marathons and hard. You do see a lot of people get into that kind of stuff, and it's just a wonderful thing to do, because, you know, it's good as a human to challenge yourself and put your body through difficult things and all of that stuff. And you know, and to the earlier point, we talked about work-life balance, or not work-life balance, but integrating it all, right? It's all one life, and
yep.
And for
that's
me,
a nice expression. Integrating in one life. That's good. Like that.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm gonna trademark that, but I'm sure I heard it from someone else. But just doing difficult things just helps in everything. You know, I'm like, I do a hard workout, I run, I'm doing recruiting, I'm leading a team, I'm growing a global company, whatever it is. It just, I think it's very empowering to do difficult things and just keep, you know.
I think that's a great.
Louis, it's really funny because that's exactly the time when David went to Mumbai. You were in your 40s, David, or? And basically, I still remember that. David, it took him exactly 2 hours to say, yes, I'm going to go to Mumbai. Really. And I basically, at the similar time in my life, I started building a coffee shop and restaurant in London. Yeah. So do something. Yeah. No. Basically, I think it's the time in your life when you realize what you've done the last 15, 20 years is just simply not enough anymore.
Yeah, no, that's true.
For a lot of people, I think it's pretty intuitive. You know, you don't necessarily overthink it. I do think there is value, however, particularly if people feel trapped, to try and very consciously unpick it. And that's where I think this introspection that one of the things that we try and talk about in a groundhog career is that many of us sort of fear ourselves the most. We're most scared of looking within ourselves and asking ourselves the question, who are we really? It's much easier to go, oh, I admire Lewis, I'm gonna do what he does, because he seems to know what he's doing. So we have these role models in our lives that we tend to sort of say, well, we'll just do more of that, or we'll just go out and run long distances. As I say, for lots of people, it becomes intuitive that this reinvention process is, because in a way it's a series of experiments, right? You know, launch a coffee shop, go running, you know, and in the process of doing so, perhaps we're not thinking about it deeply, but we are exposing ourselves to different experiences and meeting different people and seeing different opportunities. And I'm willing to bet that through the process of, you know, all of the various mad mudders or stuff that you're doing, Lewis, that in the process you're meeting people who are inspiring different thoughts, who are starting to open the door to say, oh, I didn't realize we could do this or something else. And similarly with Helmut, with his Kipfall coffee shop, which was extraordinarily successful until COVID. Those things, I think, start to create different connections for you. And actually, in a way, they're rewiring your brain. The whole, when you look at the neuroscience around this, our brain starts to automate routine tasks. It's a brilliant, extraordinary human trait that if we get to do the same thing every day, our brain starts to automate that. The neurons in our brain, not exactly hardwired, but they start to do them without us being conscious of them. People talk about this in sports, they talk about this at work, that you become so good at something that it's intuitive, you don't even think about it. And so, but the danger with that is it's also a trap. It starts to trap you in this repetitive routine. So these experiments that you were talking about help break that cycle, and they rewire your brain to start to think about the world and what you do differently. And I think that's to be encouraged.
Great.
Obviously.
Yeah, great point. Absolutely great point. I think I would think of it as like adventure. Like we like adventure. We like stories. We like, you know, creating the next chapter. You know, like I meet you guys in, you know, a couple of years' time for a coffee in London or Vienna, and you're like, right, well, what have you been up to, Lewis? You know, and it's just like, what have I done? What's the story? What have I? You know, like I think we like adventure, and I don't know. A lot of people, they're just, I don't know if scared's the right word, or just trying things. I mean, hey, starting a coffee shop in London, wonderful. I mean, that's the things that you went through to do that. You wouldn't have got that experience anywhere else, right? And you were brave enough to do it, and maybe your friends were telling you what you're doing, but you did it anyway. And nice. Amazing story, right? And whether it closed in COVID or what a great thing to do, you know. And congratulations for trying, because again, I think it's the whole.
It still exists, by the way. It still exists.
Oh,
we recovered.
So what is it? Tell me, where is it? Where is it? I can go down there for a coffee.
It's near Angel, Canton Passage. It's called Kipfall.
Oh my God! Well, I live less than a mile away. So
well, Kipfall. It's called Kipfall.
An Austrian.
An Austrian schnitzel and cakes. That's what you get.
Right, I'm there. I'm there for a cup of tea or coffee and a nice schnitzel. I'm done. Amazing. Well, look, I think that's a good place to end, guys. Thank you so much for joining me. I really enjoyed it. It went very quick. Appreciate you both sharing your views and opinions. And where can people find the book? There we go. Amazon, all good book stops.
Amazon, right. Book, right.
Yeah, you can follow Dr. Schuster and Oxley. We have a website, which is simply drschusterandoxley.com. You can go to Amazon, UK or US, wherever you are. It's available on all of the other big retail sites. You can also follow us on Instagram at, again, Dr. Schuster and Oxley, and on LinkedIn.
Great. Well, we'll put all of that in the show notes at the bottom. So if anyone wants to go follow the links, follow them on all the socials, you can go click below. Again, thank you very much for joining me, guys.
You're a wonderful host, Louis. Really enjoyed that very much.
Be kind. Thank you.